The Deathworld Council studied human biology, then screamed in terror as their lethal experiment backfired spectacularly, injected with deadly venom. Joanna's blood evolved instantaneously, generating antibodies that liquefied the toxin and escaped containment. As Counselor Vrek collapsed, paralyzed by the human's biological defense, Dr. Voss made her choice. Science without consent wasn't science at all. The crystalline spires of the Council Citadel pierced the crimson sky of Varelli's 12, capturing the dying light of twin suns as they set behind the horizon. From her laboratory window, high in the tallest spire, Dr. Aaron Voss watched with detached curiosity as the planet's lethal nocturnal predators began to stir in the bioterrariums far below. A Class 13 Deathworld. Varelli's 12 had been chosen as the Deathworld Council's headquarters for a reason. Its indigenous flora and fauna represented the pinnacle of evolution's most vicious creations, organisms that had survived millennia of natural selection in an environment designed to kill. The council members had all evolved on similar planets, their bodies testament to the harsh crucibles that had forged them. Voss adjusted her ocular implants, zooming in on a particularly fascinating specimen, the Varelian mantis wasp, nearly 2 meters tall with serrated forelegs that could slice through carbon steel. Its venom was complex enough that her team had spent 3 standard years just mapping its molecular structure. "Beautiful," she murmured, watching it disembowel a prey animal with surgical precision. "I fail to see the beauty in inefficiency," came a gravelly voice from behind her. Voss didn't need to turn to recognize Counselor Vrek. His respiratory apparatus always announced his presence with a distinctive wheeze, an unavoidable consequence of evolving on a planet with atmosphere comprised mostly of methane and sulfur compounds. "The predator takes 17 seconds to incapacitate its prey," Vrek continued, his 8 obsidian eyes reflecting the laboratory's sterile lighting. "On my world, death comes in under 3. Voss finally turned, offering the counselor a respectful nod. The complexity of its venom makes up for the time differential. It paralyzes, dissolves, and preserves simultaneously. Vrek's exoskeleton clicked as he moved further into the laboratory. As the political overseer assigned to her research division, he rarely visited without purpose. "The Supreme Registrar has called an emergency session. Your presence is required." This was unexpected. Voss had been scheduled to conduct tissue viability experiments on specimens from the Tyrrellian acid bogs all evening. "May I ask the nature of this session?" "A transmission from Earth." Voss felt a flutter of professional interest. Earth was classified as a borderline deathworld, a Class 12 planet whose inhabitants showed some promise, but were ultimately unremarkable in the grand hierarchy of evolved species. The Council rarely concerned itself with anything below Class 13. "What could possibly warrant emergency status?" she asked. Vrek's mandibles clicked in what Voss had learned to interpret as irritation. "It would be more efficient for you to see for yourself." As they exited the laboratory, Rello, Voss's young lab assistant, hurried to keep pace with them. The Floxian was the newest addition to her team, his translucent skin still showing the pink blush of youth. Unlike most council employees, he had been raised on a relatively benign world, making him something of an outsider. "Should I continue the Tyrrellian experiments, Dr. Voss?" he asked. His voice pitched higher than normal in the presence of Counselor Vrek. "No, secure the specimens and join us. Your observational input may be valuable." The council chamber occupied the entire top level of the central spire, a vast circular room with a transparent dome ceiling that offered an unobstructed view of Varelli's 12's predator-filled sky. 48 counselors representing the galaxy's most lethal planets sat in tiered seating around a central holographic projector. The air buzzed with the varied sounds of their communication: clicks, whistles, subsonic rumbles, and the occasional electromagnetic pulse for those species who had evolved beyond physical speech. The Supreme Registrar, a massive being encased in a chitinous shell that bore the scars of countless battles, gestured for silence as Voss, Vrek, and Rello took their places. "We have intercepted a transmission from Earth," the registrar announced, his voice translator, conveying his words in the Council's standard communication protocol. "A planet previously classified as a borderline Deathworld, Category 12. What you are about to witness may require a reassessment." The chamber darkened, and the holographic projector flared to life. The image was grainy, intercepted at extreme range, but clear enough to discern what appeared to be a battlefield. Smoke rose from shattered buildings, while weapons fire echoed in the distance. The focus tightened on a group of humans in stained garments, huddled around a makeshift table. Upon it lay another human, clearly gravely injured. The attending humans wore no protective gear beyond thin gloves and simple facial coverings. "Primitive," muttered Vrek beside her. But then, Voss watched with growing fascination as the humans did something extraordinary. Using what appeared to be crude metal implements, they cut open the chest of the injured subject. Blood, bright red and oxygen-rich, poured from the incision. Yet the operators seemed unconcerned. With their bare hands inside the subject's thoracic cavity, they manipulated the still-beating heart. A respectful silence had fallen over the council chamber. What they were witnessing violated dozens of established biological principles. No sentient species should be able to survive such invasive trauma, let alone have others of its kind perform such procedures with primitive tools in an unsanitized environment. The Supreme Registrar gestured, and the projection shifted to another scene. Similar, but in a different location. Again, humans cut into their own kind. This time, extracting a projectile from a brain case. The patient remained conscious throughout the procedure. These recordings span several Earth years and multiple conflict zones, the registrar explained. Their medical personnel routinely perform these procedures under extreme environmental stress with minimal equipment. The survival rates defy all established xenobiological models. Voss found herself leaning forward, professional detachment momentarily forgotten. "The implications are significant," she said, her mind racing through the possibilities. If humans can endure such trauma and invasive procedures without sophisticated medical technology, then they represent either an evolutionary anomaly or a serious threat, completed the registrar. Possibly both. Counselor Vrek's exoskeleton rattled, a sign of agitation. "What is your recommendation, Supreme Registrar?" "We require a specimen for detailed study." The registrar's compound eyes swept the chamber. "Dr. Voss, as our chief xenobiologist, you will head this investigation. You have authorization to dispatch a retrieval team to Earth immediately." Voss felt a surge of professional excitement. This was precisely the kind of evolutionary puzzle that had drawn her to xenobiology. "I would be honored, Supreme Registrar. I recommend we select a specimen with medical training, one who has performed these procedures. Their practical knowledge combined with our analysis could yield fascinating insights." Beside her, Rello shifted uncomfortably. "Supreme Registrar," he ventured, his voice barely audible. "Our protocols for sentient specimens require informed consent." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the council. "Of course," the registrar responded. "The retrieval team will ensure all proper protocols are observed. The specimen will sign our standard consent documents." Voss knew what this meant. The standard consent would be presented to the human during extraction, under conditions designed to ensure compliance. It was technically within council regulations, but skirted the ethical boundaries that Rello, with his soft-world upbringing, held dear. "Make your preparations, Dr. Voss," the registrar concluded. "The council expects preliminary findings within one standard week." As the session ended and the councilors began to disperse, Rello approached Voss with obvious trepidation. "Dr. Voss, about the consent protocols." "They will be followed to the letter," Voss interrupted, already mentally cataloging the equipment she would need. The Council has spoken. Rello. This is an unprecedented opportunity to study a species that defies our understanding of biological resilience. But under duress, any consent is still consent under Council law. She finished for him. Your concerns are noted. Now, help me prepare the laboratory. We'll need to modify the containment module to accommodate human physiology. As she strode toward the exit, Voss failed to notice the troubled look that passed between Rello and several of the younger council aides. Her mind was already racing with experimental protocols and test sequences. If humans could survive open-heart surgery in a battlefield with primitive tools, what other biological wonders might they harbor? The retrieval pod descended through Earth's atmosphere under cover of darkness, its stealth systems rendering it invisible to the planet's primitive detection technology. Voss monitored the approach from her laboratory, where the containment module had been prepared according to the scant data available on human physiological requirements. Target acquired, reported the extraction team leader, his voice coming through the communication array. Subject is isolated in a medical facility near an active conflict zone. Minimal security presence. Remember, Voss instructed, we need the subject intact and conscious. Use non-invasive immobilization only. Understood. Initiating extraction. Voss watched through the team's visual feed as they breached the facility, a simple structure with fabric walls and basic equipment. Inside, a human female worked alone, organizing supplies in what appeared to be a primitive version of a medical storage unit. The team deployed a localized stasis field, freezing the human in mid-motion. Even through the grainy feed, Voss could see the subject's eyes widening in shock as she realized she could not move. Subject secured, the team leader reported, preparing transport. One of the team members approached the immobilized human, holding a tablet displaying the Council's standard consent form, translated into the subject's language. You have been selected for an important scientific study, the team member recited in carefully practiced human speech. Your participation will advance interstellar understanding of your species. Sign here to indicate consent. The stasis field was adjusted to allow minimal movement of one hand. The human's face contorted in what Voss recognized as fear and anger. But with team members holding weapons trained on her, she eventually made a mark on the tablet. Consent acquired, the team leader confirmed, returning to Citadel with specimen. Voss felt a momentary twinge of something, not quite discomfort, but perhaps acknowledgement that the consent process was less than ideal. She dismissed it quickly. The advancement of knowledge required certain compromises, and the Council's authority in these matters was absolute. Prepare the containment module, she instructed Rello, and ensure the preliminary scan sequences are calibrated for human physiology. Rello complied, though his movements seemed hesitant. Dr. Voss, perhaps we should have a translator ready. If the subject can communicate, we might learn. An excellent suggestion, Voss interrupted, pleasantly surprised by her assistant's insight. Arrange for a real-time translation system, and set up recording devices throughout the module. I want to document every reaction, every physiological response. 6 hours later, the retrieval pod docked with the Citadel. Voss watched through the observation window as the extraction team transferred the human, now sedated for transport, into the containment module. Even unconscious, the subject's resilience was evident. Despite the stress of extraction and unfamiliar atmosphere, her vital signs remained remarkably stable. Subject secured in containment, the team leader reported. Sedation will wear off in approximately 20 minutes. Voss nodded. You're dismissed. My team will take over from here. As the extraction team departed, Voss approached the containment module for her first close look at the human. Female, approximately 30 Earth years by her estimation, with dark hair and skin that showed evidence of exposure to ultraviolet radiation. A small metal tag around her neck identified her as Joanna Miles, Medical Corps. Begin preliminary scans, Voss instructed her team. I want baseline readings on all physiological systems before she regains consciousness. The scanning equipment hummed to life, bathing the unconscious human in various wavelengths of light and energy. Data began flowing across the monitoring screens. Heart rate, respiratory function, neural activity, cellular metabolism. Fascinating, Voss murmured, examining the readings. Her cellular regeneration rate is remarkably high for a non-Deathworld species. And look at these stress hormone levels. They should have caused systemic shutdown. Yet her homeostasis remains stable. Rello studied the neural activity display with evident concern. Dr. Voss, these patterns suggest the sedation is wearing off faster than expected. She's processing sensory input already. Good. I want to observe her awakening response. As if on cue, the human's eyes snapped open. Instead of the gradual return to consciousness that Voss had anticipated, Joanna Miles went from sedated to fully alert in seconds. Her gaze darted around the laboratory, taking in the alien environment with remarkable speed, before focusing on Voss with an intensity that the xenobiologist found unexpectedly disconcerting. "Where am I?" Joanna demanded, her words automatically translated by the system Rello had prepared. "Who are you people?" Voss stepped closer to the containment field. "My name is Dr. Aaron Voss. I am Chief Xenobiologist for the Deathworld Council. You are in our research facility on Varelli's 12. Varelli's 12. Joanna attempted to sit up, discovering the restraints that held her to the examination platform. "What the hell? You said this was a scientific study, not imprisonment." "The restraints are for your own safety," Voss explained, noting with interest how the human's vital signs had spiked but were already beginning to stabilize. "This facility contains many hazards that would be lethal to your physiology. The containment module provides an appropriate environment for your species. Let me go. Now." Each word was enunciated with careful precision, the human's body tensing against the restraints. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You've provided consent for this study, which is expected to last approximately 30 standard days. After that, assuming all goes well, you'll be returned to Earth with full compensation as per Council protocols." "Consent," Joanna laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You call having guns pointed at me while I'm frozen in place consent?" From his position at the monitoring station, Rello glanced uncomfortably at Voss. "The legal requirements have been satisfied," Voss replied, making a note about the human's quick comprehension of her situation. "Now, I'd like to begin with some basic questions about human physiology, particularly regarding trauma response." "Go to hell," Voss blinked, her translator struggling momentarily with the idiom before providing context. "Your cooperation would make this process more comfortable for you, but it isn't strictly necessary. We can gather most of what we need through observation and non-invasive testing." To demonstrate, she activated one of the scanning arrays. A beam of light passed over Joanna's body, creating a three-dimensional model of her internal structures on the nearby display. "Remarkable," Voss commented, examining the image. "Your skeletal structure shows evidence of multiple previous fractures, all healed with minimal intervention. How is this possible?" Despite her anger, Joanna's professional curiosity seemed momentarily piqued. She glanced at the display. "Humans heal. It's what we do. Broken bones knit back together if they're set properly. Without regeneration technology, without cellular acceleration, just splints, casts, and time." Joanna's gaze hardened again. "Something you're apparently not planning to give me." Voss made another note. "Your hostility is understandable but unnecessary. You won't be harmed beyond the parameters specified in your consent form, which I haven't read and didn't freely sign." "Nevertheless," Voss turned to Rello, "prepare for the first tissue sample collection. We'll start with standard epidermal and blood analysis. As Rello approached with a collection device, Joanna renewed her struggle against the restraints. "Don't you dare!" "It's a simple extraction," Voss explained, watching with clinical interest as the human's stress response triggered visible physiological changes. Increased blood flow to the skin, pupil dilation, respiratory acceleration. The discomfort will be minimal. The collection process took only moments. A small patch of skin from Joanna's arm, a vial of blood from a vein. Throughout, Voss carefully documented the human's reactions, noting both the verbal protests and the remarkable way her body responded to the minor trauma. "Take these to the analysis chamber," she instructed Rello, handing him the samples. "Full molecular breakdown, cellular stress testing, and regeneration assessment." As Rello departed, Voss turned back to her subject. "You should rest now. The next phase of testing will begin in 8 hours, after we've analyzed these preliminary samples." "You can't keep me here," Joanna stated, her voice now eerily calm. "Whatever you think you know about humans, you're underestimating us." Voss found the comment intriguing. "On the contrary, it's precisely because we suspect humans are more remarkable than previously classified that you're here. Your species' ability to survive extreme trauma has caught the Council's attention. Consider it a compliment. Kidnapping me at gunpoint doesn't feel very complimentary. Science often requires difficult choices." Voss adjusted the environmental controls, dimming the lights to match what their research suggested would be appropriate for a human sleep cycle. "I'll return when the analysis is complete." As she turned to leave, Voss heard Joanna call after her. "Dr. Voss, when I get out of here, and I will get out, I'm going to make sure you understand exactly what it means to experiment on humans without their consent." Voss paused, genuinely curious. "And what does it mean?" "It means you've made yourself our enemy. And trust me, that's the last thing your Deathworld Council wants." Voss found the threat both presumptuous and fascinating. A Class 12 species daring to challenge the Council? It was almost charming in its audacity. She made another note in her research log. Subject displays remarkable confidence despite obvious power disparity. Possible cultural adaptation to compensate for physiological limitations. As she exited the laboratory, Voss felt a surge of scientific excitement. The next 30 days promised to be the most interesting of her career. Rello was waiting for her in the analysis chamber, his expression troubled. "Dr. Voss, the preliminary results from the blood sample are unusual." "Define unusual?" "The cellular regeneration rate is approximately 300% faster than our models predicted for a Class 12 species. And look at this." He gestured to a microscopic image on the display. "When exposed to the standard cellular disruption agent, the blood cells don't lyse as expected. They adapt." Voss leaned closer, adjusting the magnification. What she saw sent a thrill of scientific discovery through her. The human blood cells were indeed changing in response to the disruption agent, their membranes reconfiguring to resist the chemical attack. "Extraordinary," she breathed. "Begin a full battery of stress tests. I want to see exactly how far this adaptive response extends." As Rello prepared the tests, Voss couldn't help but wonder what other surprises Joanna Miles might reveal. Perhaps the Deathworld Council had been too hasty in their classification of Earth and its inhabitants. This could be the discovery of her lifetime. 8 hours later, Voss returned to the containment module with a renewed sense of purpose. The test results had exceeded even her most optimistic expectations. Human blood showed remarkable adaptive properties, capable of responding to a wide range of chemical and biological threats. The tissue samples displayed accelerated healing capabilities that rivaled even some Deathworld species. But it was the neural scans that truly fascinated her. Unlike most species, whose brains showed predictable patterns when under stress, Joanna's neural activity was chaotic, yet somehow coordinated. Millions of neurons firing in complex sequences that defied easy categorization. Voss found her subject awake and alert, watching the laboratory with calculating eyes. The restraints remained in place, but Joanna had somehow managed to shift her position slightly, an impressive feat given their design. "Good morning, though I understand that greeting may be temporally inaccurate from your perspective," Voss began, genuinely attempting courtesy. "I hope you were able to rest. Kidnapping, restraints, and medical experimentation without consent don't generally make for a restful night," Joanna replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "But I'm sure you knew that already." Voss decided to ignore the hostility. "Your preliminary test results are remarkable. Your blood, in particular, shows adaptive properties that are highly unusual for a non-Deathworld species." Something flickered in Joanna's eyes. Pride, perhaps? "Humans have been surviving on Earth for hundreds of thousands of years. We've adapted to everything from Arctic cold to tropical diseases to industrial pollution. Did you really think we'd be easy to kill?" "Not easy, no. But perhaps more conventionally vulnerable." Voss gestured, and a series of displays activated around the containment module. "Today's tests will focus on your pain response and healing capabilities. The Council is particularly interested in how humans manage to perform complex medical procedures under extreme stress." Joanna's expression hardened. "You saw battlefield surgery. That's different. We don't have a choice in those situations." "Precisely. The lack of choice creates conditions that should make success impossible. Yet humans consistently defy those limitations. Why? How?" Voss approached the containment field, genuinely curious. "Help me understand, and I promise these tests will be less invasive." For a moment, Joanna seemed to consider the offer. Then she shook her head. "You still don't get it. You can't understand human resilience by strapping us down and cutting us open. It doesn't work that way." "Then how does it work?" "It's about choice, about agency. Humans fight hardest when we choose the battle." Joanna met Voss's gaze directly. "Right now, I'm choosing to fight you." Voss found the concept intriguing, but ultimately irrelevant to her research parameters. "Your philosophical position is noted. However, we must proceed with the scheduled tests." She activated the first protocol sequence. A robotic arm extended into the containment module, bearing a device designed to measure pain thresholds through carefully calibrated stimuli. "This will cause discomfort," Voss explained, "but no permanent damage. We'll begin with mild electrical stimulation and progress through various modalities." "Don't do this," Joanna warned, tensing against the restraints. "Whatever you think you're going to learn, it's not worth it." Voss paused, momentarily struck by the intensity in the human's voice. Not fear, exactly, but something more complex. "Science requires data. Joanna Miles, your species has attracted the Council's attention. That attention will not simply disappear if I halt these tests." Without waiting for further response, she activated the device. Joanna's body jerked as the first electrical current passed through her arm. The monitors recorded every physiological response: heart rate acceleration, endorphin release, muscle tension patterns. But what struck Voss most was the way Joanna's expression changed. Instead of grimacing in pain, her features settled into a mask of determined calm, as though she were deliberately controlling her reaction. "Fascinating," Voss murmured. "You're consciously modulating your pain response." Joanna didn't answer, but her eyes remained fixed on Voss, with an intensity that the xenobiologist found increasingly disquieting. The test continued for hours. Electrical stimulation gave way to thermal stress, then to carefully calibrated pressure points designed to trigger maximum pain with minimal tissue damage. Throughout it all, Joanna maintained that same determined expression, occasionally gasping or flinching but never breaking. "Dr. Voss," Rello ventured during a brief pause in the testing. "The subject's endorphin levels are approaching dangerous thresholds. Perhaps we should allow a recovery period." Voss studied the readings. The human's body was indeed flooded with stress hormones and natural painkillers, levels that would have rendered most species unconscious. Yet Joanna remained alert, her gaze never wavering. Very well. Deactivate the pain response protocols. Voss made several notes in her research log. The data collected exceeds our baseline expectations by approximately 73%. Most impressive. As the equipment retracted, Joanna finally spoke, her voice hoarse but steady. Do you enjoy this, Dr. Voss? Causing pain to understand it? The question caught Voss off guard. Enjoy? No. I find it scientifically valuable. Personal enjoyment is irrelevant to the research process. Nothing sentient beings do is without emotion. Not even science. Joanna's breathing was gradually returning to normal. Especially not science. An interesting hypothesis, but one colored by your species' particular neurological organization. Voss adjusted the containment module's settings to promote healing. Humans appear to experience emotions more intensely than most species, perhaps as an evolutionary compensation for your physical vulnerabilities. Or maybe we just admit to them instead of hiding behind scientific detachment. Joanna shifted against the restraints, wincing slightly. Your assistant there, Rello, right? He feels... I can see it in his face when you push these tests too far. Rello looked up, startled at being directly addressed. Dr. Voss, he said quietly, the subject requires hydration and nutrition. Council protocols mandate basic biological needs must be met, even during intensive testing sequences. Voss nodded. Prepare the standard nutrient solution calibrated for human physiology. And yes, you may loosen the restraints enough to allow consumption. I'll observe from the monitoring station. As she moved away, Voss found herself unexpectedly troubled by Joanna's words. The suggestion that scientific inquiry was emotionally motivated struck her as both primitive and vaguely threatening to her professional identity. Science on Varelli's 12 was pursued with rigorous objectivity. Messy emotions had no place in the process. Yet she couldn't deny that Rello did indeed seem affected by the human suffering. Perhaps his upbringing on a softer world had left him vulnerable to such influences. She would need to monitor him more closely to ensure his continued effectiveness. From her position at the monitoring station, Voss watched as Rello adjusted Joanna's restraints and offered her a container of nutrient solution. To her surprise, the human refused. What is she doing? Voss demanded, activating the communication link. She's requesting water instead of the nutrient solution, Rello reported. She says the solution smells toxic to her. Impossible. It was specifically formulated for human physiology. Nevertheless, she refuses to consume it. Voss frowned. Another unexpected complication. Very well. Provide water, but supplement the next test sequence to compensate for the missed nutritional intake. As Rello complied, Voss noticed something unusual in the neural activity readings. Joanna's brain was exhibiting synchronized wave patterns, unlike anything they'd recorded previously. Rhythmic pulses of activity that spread across multiple regions simultaneously. Rello, she called. Return to your station immediately. I'm detecting anomalous neural patterns. By the time her assistant had rejoined her, the pattern had intensified. Waves of synchronized electrical activity swept through Joanna's brain in precise sequences. Almost like... It's like a language, Rello whispered, staring at the display. Her neurons are communicating in organized patterns. Absurd, Voss replied, but without conviction. The evidence before her defied conventional explanation. This wasn't random stress response or typical cognitive activity. It was organized, purposeful, and completely unlike anything in their xenobiological database. Run a comparative analysis against all known neural patterns in the Council archives, she instructed. And prepare a microprobe for insertion. We need a closer look at this phenomenon. Later that night, long after Rello had been dismissed to his quarters. Voss remained in the laboratory, reviewing the day's findings. Joanna had been induced into a sleep state, though the monitors showed her brain remained unusually active, even in unconsciousness. The comparative analysis had yielded no matches in the council archives. Whatever Joanna's brain was doing, it wasn't something they had encountered before. The microprobe had provided even more puzzling data: neural clusters activating in complex sequences, chemical messengers flowing in patterns that seemed to adapt and change even as they were being observed. "What are you?" Voss murmured, studying the sleeping human through the containment field. What evolutionary pressure created this level of neural plasticity? As if in response, Joanna's eyes suddenly opened. Though the sleep induction should have kept her unconscious for hours yet, she was awake and alert, staring directly at Voss through the field. "We evolved to survive each other. Dr. Voss," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Humans are our own predators, our own prey. Everything your council fears about Deathworld evolution, we did to ourselves." Voss felt a chill that had nothing to do with the laboratory's temperature. "How did you overcome the sedation?" Joanna smiled slightly. "I told you, we adapt." "That's not a scientific explanation. Neither is what you're doing science." Joanna's gaze remained steady. "Real science respects its subjects. What you're doing is torture with data collection." Voss should have ended the conversation there, should have increased the sedation dosage and returned to her analysis. Instead, she found herself asking, "If your definition of science requires respect for test subjects, how has your species made any progress? Surely experimental protocols can't be limited by such considerations." "We learned that lesson the hard way," Joanna replied. "Through centuries of mistakes, experiments on unwilling subjects, tests that crossed ethical lines, we discovered that knowledge gained through cruelty is fundamentally flawed." "Flawed how? Data is data." "Because the cruelty itself becomes a variable you can't control for. It changes everything. The subject's responses, the researcher's observations, the conclusions drawn." Joanna shifted slightly, the restraints creaking. "Right now, you're not studying natural human biology. You're studying human biology under extreme duress, captivity, and violation. Whatever you think you're learning about us is distorted by the conditions you've created." Voss found herself unsettled by the human's reasoning. It contained a logic she couldn't immediately dismiss, which was irritating. "Your philosophical objections are noted," she said finally. "But the council requires this research, and I will complete it. Even if it's flawed, even if what you learn leads to dangerous misconceptions about humans, the council will account for experimental conditions in their analysis." Joanna laughed softly. "No, they won't. Because they've already decided what they want to believe about us. That we're just another species to classify and contain. But we're not, Dr. Voss. We're something your council has never encountered before." "And what is that exactly?" "A species that survived its own worst instincts. That's learned from its mistakes. That's looked into the abyss of self-destruction and pulled back." Joanna's voice took on a strange intensity. "We've been killing each other in increasingly creative ways for thousands of years. Do you really think anything your Deathworld Council can devise would surprise us?" Voss found she had no immediate response. The human's words carried a weight, a history that the clinical data couldn't capture. For the first time since the project began, she felt a flicker of doubt about the council's approach. Pushing the feeling aside, she adjusted the sedation controls. "You should not be conscious. This conversation is outside experimental parameters." As the increased sedation took effect, Joanna's eyes began to close, but she managed one final statement. "They'll come for me. You know, humans don't abandon their own." "Earth doesn't know you're here," Voss replied, though she was unsure why she felt compelled to respond. Your disappearance will be attributed to the conflict zone. Doesn't matter, Joanna murmured, fighting the sedation to the last moment. They'll still come. As the human finally succumbed to unconsciousness, Voss remained at the monitoring station, troubled by both the unexpected conversation and the implications of what she'd observed in Joanna's neural patterns. Something about this human defied conventional analysis, and for the first time in her career, Voss wondered if the Council's methodology might be inadequate to the task. She pushed the thought away. The Council's wisdom was not to be questioned, especially not based on the manipulative words of a test subject. Tomorrow, she would implement more rigorous protocols and maintain proper scientific distance. Yet, as she finally left the laboratory, Voss couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Not in the experiment, but in herself. The next morning, Voss arrived at the laboratory to find Counselor Vrek waiting for her, his exoskeleton polished to a formal sheen that indicated official business. "The Supreme Registrar requests an update on the human specimen," Vrek announced without preamble. "The Council is most eager to hear of your progress." Voss gestured to the data displays surrounding the containment module, where Joanna remained sedated. "As you can see, we've collected extensive baseline information on human physiological responses. The subject demonstrates remarkable adaptive capabilities, particularly in terms of neuroplasticity and cellular regeneration." Vrek moved closer to the displays, his compound eyes reflecting the scrolling data. "Impressive, but preliminary. The Council expected more definitive results by now." "Science cannot be rushed, Counselor. Proper analysis requires—" "The Council is not interested in excuses. Dr. Voss." Vrek's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Earth has been classified as a potential emerging threat. We need to understand human vulnerabilities, not merely catalog their resilience." The implication was clear, and Voss felt a sudden unease. "You're suggesting we move to more invasive testing protocols?" "I am not suggesting. I am instructing." Vrek produced an official data crystal, bearing the Registrar's seal. "These are your new research parameters, approved by the Supreme Registrar himself. You will implement them immediately." Voss accepted the crystal and inserted it into her research terminal. As she reviewed the new protocols, her unease grew into genuine concern. The Registrar was authorizing procedures that went well beyond standard xenobiological research: surgical explorations without anesthesia, exposure to Class 13 toxins, deliberate traumatic injury to assess real-time healing capabilities. "These protocols exceed the parameters specified in the subject's consent document," she noted, careful to keep her tone neutral. "The consent document contains provisions for protocol adjustment at Council discretion," Vrek replied dismissively. "Everything is within legal parameters. But the ethical considerations are irrelevant when Council security is at stake." Vrek moved closer, looming over her. "Need I remind you, Dr. Voss, that your primary loyalty is to the Council, not to some primitive specimen? Or perhaps your judgment has been compromised by too much direct interaction with the subject." Voss straightened, professional pride stung by the implication. "My judgment is sound, Counselor. I merely wish to ensure all procedural requirements were satisfied." "They are. Now, when can you begin implementing these new protocols?" Glancing at the sedated human, Voss calculated. "The subject requires at least 4 more hours of recovery time before further testing. Cellular stress levels are still elevated from yesterday's procedures." 2 hours, Vrek countered. "And I will observe the next test sequence personally. The Registrar is particularly interested in the human's response to our apex predator toxins." After Vrek departed, Voss stood motionless before the containment module, the data crystal heavy in her hand. The new protocols were methodologically sound, but pushed well beyond what she would have designed independently. There was a difference between rigorous science and deliberate cruelty, and these procedures seemed designed to find that line and cross it. "Dr. Voss?" She turned to find Rello watching her with obvious concern. "I couldn't help overhearing," he said quietly. "Are we really going to implement those new protocols?" "We have our orders," Voss replied, though without her usual conviction. "But you just said the subject needs at least 4 hours of recovery time. Proceeding sooner could compromise the data." The counselor was quite clear. Rello moved closer, lowering his voice further. "Dr. Voss, I've been analyzing the neural patterns we recorded last night. They're extraordinary, unlike anything in our database. Yes, I observed similar anomalies. It's more than anomalies." Rello glanced nervously toward the laboratory entrance. "The patterns show evidence of what some researchers might call emergent consciousness, a level of neural integration that suggests something beyond conventional sentience." Voss frowned. "That's speculative at best, and irrelevant to our current directives." "Is it?" Rello's translucent skin flushed with emotion. "If we're dealing with a consciousness more complex than our models can account for, doesn't that change the ethical calculus of our research?" "The Council has made its decision, but you're the chief xenobiologist. Your scientific assessment carries weight." Voss felt trapped between her scientific integrity and her duty to the Council. Joanna's words from the night before echoed uncomfortably in her mind. Real science respects its subjects. What you're doing is torture with data collection. "Prepare the laboratory for the new protocols," she said finally. "But extend the recovery period to 3 hours. We'll compromise between scientific necessity and the counselor's demands." Rello looked as though he wanted to argue further, but instead nodded reluctantly. "Yes, Dr. Voss." As he moved away to begin preparations, Voss approached the containment module. Joanna remained unconscious, but the monitors showed her neural activity was far from dormant. Even in sedated sleep, her brain pulsed with those same organized patterns they had observed the night before. "What are you?" Voss murmured again, studying the human's face. "What are you trying to tell us that we're too blind to see?" 3 hours later, the laboratory had been reconfigured according to the new protocols. Additional monitoring equipment surrounded the containment module, and a series of injection systems had been installed, ready to introduce various compounds into Joanna's bloodstream. Counselor Vrek had returned as promised, accompanied by 2 junior counselors, eager to witness the groundbreaking research. They stood at a respectful distance, their attention fixed on the containment module as Voss prepared to wake Joanna from sedation. "You will begin with the venom extract from the Varelian mantis wasp," Vrek instructed. "A small dose initially, to establish baseline reaction." Voss nodded, though her internal discomfort had only grown during the preparation period. The mantis wasp venom was among the most complex neurotoxins on Vareli's 12, capable of causing excruciating pain while paralyzing the victim's respiratory system. Even diluted, it would cause extreme distress. "Administering wake stimulant now," she announced, activating the first sequence. Within moments, Joanna began to stir. Unlike her previous awakening, this one was gradual, her body fighting the lingering effects of the extended sedation. When her eyes finally opened, they were initially unfocused, then widened as she took in the significantly altered laboratory setup. "What is this?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "What have you done?" "Subject is conscious and aware," Voss noted for the record, beginning explanatory protocol. She approached the containment field. "Joanna Miles, the Council has authorized expanded research parameters. We will now assess your physiological response to various compounds native to Deathworld environments." Joanna's gaze moved past Voss to the observing counselors, lingering on Vrek's imposing form. More torture disguised as science. Wonderful. "This is not torture," Vrek interjected, stepping forward. "This is necessary research to understand a potential threat to Council security." "I'm strapped to a table while you prepare to inject me with God knows what," Joanna replied, her voice steadying as she fully regained consciousness. From where I'm lying, that's torture. Vrek's exoskeleton rattled with irritation. The specimen's continued defiance suggests insufficient control parameters. Dr. Voss, I recommend neural suppression before proceeding. Neural suppression may interfere with the data collection, Voss countered, surprising herself with her willingness to contradict the counselor. For accurate results, we need the subject's nervous system functioning normally. Vrek seemed about to argue, but then nodded curtly. Proceed with the initial injection, then. Let us see how resilient this human truly is. Voss turned to the control panel. Preparing diluted mantis wasp venom, 5% concentration. Administering in 3, 2, 1. The injection system hummed, and a small amount of pale green fluid entered the intravenous line connected to Joanna's arm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Joanna's body went rigid, her back arching against the restraints as the venom hit her bloodstream. The monitors exploded with data, heart rate skyrocketing, blood pressure surging, stress hormones flooding her system. A scream tore from Joanna's throat, raw and primal, before her vocal cords seized along with the rest of her muscles. Fascinating, one of the junior counselors commented. Even at this low concentration, the effect is immediate and severe. Voss hardly heard him. She was transfixed by the readings on the neural monitor. Despite the overwhelming pain, Joanna's brain was demonstrating that same organized wave pattern, but now amplified to an extraordinary degree. It wasn't random firing caused by pain. It was a coordinated response, as if her entire nervous system was communicating with itself at a level they had never observed in any species. Dr. Voss, Rello called urgently. Look at the cellular analysis. Voss tore her attention from the neural display to the microscopic feed, showing real-time images of Joanna's blood. What she saw defied explanation. The human's white blood cells were changing shape, their surfaces developing receptor sites that perfectly matched the molecular structure of the venom. They're adapting to the toxin, she breathed, incredulous. Actively reconfiguring to neutralize it. Impossible, Vrek declared, moving to examine the display himself. No species can generate novel antibodies that quickly. It would require evolution in real time. Voss finished, unable to contain her scientific amazement, despite the ethical horror of the situation. Her immune system is literally evolving in response to the threat. On the examination platform, Joanna's body continued to convulse, but the monitors showed something remarkable happening. The venom's concentration in her bloodstream was decreasing, not through normal metabolic processes, but through active neutralization by her rapidly evolving immune cells. Increase the concentration, Vrek ordered. Let's see if this adaptation has limits. Voss hesitated, her scientific curiosity warring with growing moral discomfort. Counselor, we should allow time to fully document this initial response before. Increase it now. Dr. Voss, 20% concentration. The command was unmistakable. With reluctance, Voss adjusted the settings and initiated the second injection. This time, Joanna's reaction was even more extreme. Her body contorted against the restraints with such force that the examination platform itself shuddered. Blood trickled from her nose and the corners of her eyes as capillaries ruptured under the strain. Respiratory system failing, Rello reported, his voice tight with distress. Brain oxygen levels critical. Yet, even as these warnings flashed across the monitors, the cellular analysis told a different story. Joanna's immune response was accelerating, producing new antibodies at a rate that should have been biologically impossible. More incredibly, these antibodies weren't just neutralizing the venom in her bloodstream, they were actively attacking the delivery system itself, breaking down the synthetic materials of the injection apparatus. The subject is affecting the equipment, one of the junior counselors noted with alarm. This suggests capabilities beyond our initial assessment. Vrek's attention was fixed on Joanna, his posture betraying an emotion Voss had never seen in the counselor before. Fear. Terminate the specimen, he ordered suddenly. Immediately. What? Voss turned to him in shock. Counselor, that's not… It's a direct order. Dr. Voss. This creature represents an immediate threat to Council security. Its biological capabilities exceed our containment protocols. Before Voss could respond, a new alarm sounded, shrill and urgent. On the displays, red warnings flashed as the containment module's integrity monitors detected a breach. Impossible, Voss muttered, checking the systems. The module is designed to… Look, Rello pointed to the injection apparatus, where the tubing had begun to dissolve, apparently corroded by some unknown agent. Drops of Joanna's blood, now mixed with the venom and her evolved antibodies, were falling from the damaged equipment onto the laboratory floor. As they watched in horror, the drops began to emit a fine mist, microscopic droplets that rose into the air like living fog. Biological contamination detected, announced the laboratory's automated system. Emergency protocols engaged. Decontamination fields sprang to life around the module, but too late. The mist had already spread beyond their range, floating through the air toward the observing counselors. Seal the laboratory, Vrek commanded, backing toward the exit. Full quarantine procedures. But the mist moved with uncanny purpose, swirling around obstacles and flowing through the air recycling systems. The junior counselors fled in panic, but Vrek wasn't fast enough. A tendril of the mist enveloped him, and he inhaled reflexively. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Vrek's exoskeleton began to vibrate, the segments grinding against each other as his internal organs convulsed. A sound emerged from his speech apparatus, not words, but a high-pitched scream that his translator couldn't process. It's attacking his nervous system, Voss realized, watching in shock as the counselor collapsed to the floor, his limbs thrashing in spasms, identical to those Joanna had experienced minutes earlier. Inside the containment module, Joanna had gone still. The monitors showed her vital signs stabilizing, impossibly, miraculously recovering from what should have been lethal exposure. Her eyes opened, finding Voss through the containment field. I told you, she said, her voice ragged but clear. Humans adapt? Voss stood frozen between the convulsing counselor and the containment module, scientific certainty crumbling around her. Everything she thought she knew about xenobiology, about the hierarchy of evolved species, about the Council's superiority, all of it was being upended before her eyes. In that moment of crisis, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of activating the laboratory's lethal containment protocols as Council doctrine demanded, she rushed to the main control panel and initiated an emergency override. Dr. Voss, Rello exclaimed. What are you doing? What I should have done from the beginning, she replied, fingers flying over the controls. Computer, disengage all restraints in Containment Module Alpha. Deactivate injection systems and scanning protocols. Warning, the computer responded. This action violates Council security directives. Override authorization Voss Epsilon 73. Execute now. Inside the module, the restraints holding Joanna released with a pneumatic hiss. The injection lines detached, retracting into the walls of the chamber. Rello, Voss called. Secure the laboratory entrance. Lock it down under research quarantine protocols. To his credit, the young assistant didn't hesitate. As he hurried to the entrance controls, Voss approached the containment field. Can you stand? She asked Joanna. The human pushed herself upright, movements shaky but determined. I think so. Why are you helping me now? Because you were right, Voss admitted. This isn't science, and whatever the Council intended, I can't be part of it anymore. She deactivated the containment field. Joanna stepped out cautiously, her legs trembling with the after-effects of the venom. What about him? She asked, nodding toward Vrek, who had stopped convulsing but lay motionless on the floor, his exoskeleton now covered in a fine sheen of moisture. The aerosol you produced appears to have induced a state similar to what you experienced. but his physiology isn't adapting as yours did. Voss checked the counselor's life signs on her portable scanner. He's alive, but paralyzed. It should be temporary. Should be? Joanna raised an eyebrow. This is somewhat unprecedented territory. A new alarm sounded throughout the Citadel, the distinctive three-tone sequence that indicated a full security alert. They know, Rello called from the entrance. The other counselors must have reported the containment breach. Security teams will be here within minutes. Voss looked from Joanna to Rello, then to the laboratory around them. Her life's work, now irrevocably altered. We need to leave, now. Leave? Rello's translucent skin paled further. You mean evacuate the laboratory? I mean evacuate the Citadel. Voss moved to her research terminal and began rapidly downloading files. Once the Council realizes what's happened, what Joanna's blood can do, they'll implement extinction protocols. They'll sterilize this entire facility and everyone in it, rather than risk exposure. And you're just realizing this now? Joanna asked, incredulous. After you kidnapped me and tortured me for science? Yes. Voss met the human's gaze directly. I am. And I accept full responsibility for my actions. But right now, we need to focus on survival. Your blood has demonstrated properties that the Council will consider an existential threat. If they capture you again, they won't experiment. They'll simply destroy you, along with anyone exposed to you. Joanna seemed about to argue further, but the urgency of the situation appeared to register. Fine. How do we get out of here? There's an emergency research vessel in the lower hangar, Voss replied, finishing her download and slipping the data crystal into a secure pocket. It's designed for collecting specimens from hostile environments, small, fast, and equipped with stealth capabilities. And how do we get to this hangar without being caught by security teams? Joanna pressed. Rello stepped forward. The maintenance conduits, they run throughout the Citadel, and security rarely monitors them. I can guide us through. Voss nodded approvingly. Good thinking. We'll need to move quickly. Joanna, can you walk unaided? The human straightened, squaring her shoulders with visible effort. I'll manage. But I want to be clear. I'm not going anywhere with you after we escape. I'm finding a way back to Earth. That discussion can wait, Voss replied, gathering essential equipment. Right now, our priority is getting out of this laboratory before security arrives. As if on cue, the main entrance shuddered under the impact of something heavy. Metal screeched as powerful limbs began forcing the sealed doors apart. Too late, Rello whispered, backing away from the entrance. Maintenance access, Voss instructed, pointing to a panel in the far wall. Now! Rello rushed to the panel, his slender fingers working the concealed latches. It slid open, to reveal a narrow tunnel, barely large enough for them to crawl through. You first, Voss told Joanna, who didn't need to be told twice. The human dropped to her hands and knees and scrambled into the opening. As Rello followed, Voss took one last look at her laboratory, at Counselor Vrek still paralyzed on the floor, at the containment module where everything had changed, at the life she was leaving behind. Then she dove into the maintenance tunnel, just as the laboratory doors burst open and security forces poured in. The maintenance conduits were a maze of narrow passages, dimly lit by emergency strips that cast everything in an eerie blue glow. Rello led the way, his familiarity with the Citadel's infrastructure proving invaluable as they navigated toward the lower levels. How much further? Joanna asked, her voice tight with strain. Though she hadn't complained, Voss could tell the human was struggling with the after-effects of the venom exposure. 2 more junctions, Rello replied, pausing at an intersection to consult a maintenance schematic. Then we dropped down to the hangar level. Voss brought up the rear, constantly checking behind them for signs of pursuit. The Citadel's alert system continued to blare, the tone changing to indicate different phases of the security response. They're initiating containment protocols, she translated for the others. Sealing off entire sections of the Citadel. Including the hangar? Joanna asked. Eventually, yes. But the protocols progress from top to bottom. We should have time if we hurry. They pushed on, squeezing through increasingly narrow passages as they descended. Twice they had to backtrack when they encountered sealed barriers. And once, they nearly ran headlong into a security patrol searching the main corridors. Finally, they reached a vertical shaft that Rello identified as their access point to the hangar level. It's a 3-meter drop, he explained, peering down into the darkness. I'll go first and help guide you down. Without waiting for acknowledgement, he slipped over the edge and disappeared. After a few seconds, his voice floated up. Clear. Come down slowly. Joanna went next, moving with surprising grace despite her condition. Voss followed, landing beside them in a cramped junction where several conduits converged. The hangar is through there, Rello whispered, pointing to a larger access panel. But there will be security. The alert would have triggered automatic lockdown procedures. Voss considered their options. We need a diversion. I might be able to help with that, Joanna offered, holding up her hand. A small cut on her palm was seeping blood, bright red against her pale skin. You saw what my blood did to your counselor. What if we used it? Voss stared at the human with newfound respect and wariness. You would weaponize yourself. To escape people who tortured me? Yes, I absolutely would. Joanna's expression was hard. Don't pretend to be shocked now. Dr. Voss, this is exactly what your counsel feared, and exactly why they should have left us alone. The reprimand stung, but Voss couldn't deny its justice. How would you deploy it? The ventilation system. Joanna nodded toward a small grate in the ceiling of their junction. If I understand how your citadel is designed, that feeds into the environmental controls for the hangar, right? Rello confirmed with a nervous nod. Yes, but the effects could be widespread. You saw what happened to Counselor Vrek. I did, Joanna agreed grimly. And I'm counting on it. Don't worry, I'm not looking to kill anyone. But temporary paralysis should give us the window we need. Voss studied the human carefully. Despite everything Joanna had endured, she was still choosing a non-lethal approach when lethal options were clearly available to her. It was a level of restraint that contradicted everything the Council believed about less evolved species. Very well, she decided. But we'll need to be ready to move immediately. The paralytic effect will likely trigger additional security measures. Working quickly, they fashioned a makeshift dispersal system, using equipment Voss had grabbed from the laboratory. Joanna allowed a small amount of her blood to drip into the collection chamber, where it immediately began to react with the air, producing the same mist they had witnessed earlier. Remarkable! Voss couldn't help commenting as she observed the transformation. Your blood is continuing to produce the adaptive antibodies, even outside your body. Save the scientific observations for later, Joanna replied tersely. Are we ready? Voss sealed the chamber and connected it to the ventilation grate. On my signal, Rello will activate the dispersal mechanism. We wait 30 seconds for initial distribution, then enter the hangar. Head directly for Docking Bay 7. That's where the research vessel is stationed. With nods of understanding, they took their positions. Voss gave the signal, and Rello activated the device. A soft hiss indicated the mist was being drawn into the ventilation system. They counted down 30 seconds in tense silence. Then, Voss moved to the access panel and carefully slid it open just enough to peek through. The hangar was vast, with multiple vessels docked in numbered bays. Security personnel were stationed at key points, hulking figures armed with immobilization weapons. As Voss watched, one of the guards suddenly stiffened, then began to sway on his feet. Within moments, he collapsed to the floor, followed in quick succession by the others as the mist reached them. Now, Voss whispered, pushing the panel fully open. They emerged into the hangar and moved quickly toward Bay 7, stepping carefully around the paralyzed guards. The research vessel sat on its launch pad, a sleek, dark craft designed for stealth and maneuverability rather than comfort or capacity. "I'll handle the launch sequence," Voss said as they reached the vessel. "Rello, secure the hatch. Joanna, find the medical kit and treat yourself. There should be universal regeneration compounds that will help with the venom after effects." As they boarded, alarms began to sound throughout the hangar, a different tone than before, more urgent. "Biohazard containment breach," Voss translated grimly. "They know about the blood. We have minutes at most before they initiate sterilization protocols." She slid into the pilot seat and began the launch sequence, bypassing the standard authorization protocols with her emergency override codes. The vessel hummed to life, its systems initializing with gratifying speed. "Hangar doors are sealed," Rello reported from the co-pilot position. "Standard procedure during containment." "Not a problem," Voss replied, activating a sequence she had hoped never to use. This vessel is equipped with emergency extraction capabilities. The craft's forward section reconfigured, revealing a focused energy emitter, a cutting beam designed to penetrate even the hardened materials of Deathworld environments. "Brace yourselves," she warned, then activated the beam. A blinding line of energy lanced from the vessel toward the hangar's exterior doors, slicing through the reinforced metal like it was fabric. Atmosphere began to vent explosively through the growing gap, pulling loose equipment and even some of the paralyzed guards toward the breach. "Hold on!" Voss shouted, engaging the engines at full power. The research vessel shot forward, threading the narrow opening Voss had created in the hangar doors. They burst out into the crimson sky of Varelli's 12, leaving the Citadel behind as emergency containment fields snapped into place, sealing the breach they had created. "Stealth systems engaged," Voss announced, activating the vessel's cloaking technology. "Setting course away from the Citadel. We need to put as much distance as possible between us and their pursuit vessels." In the rear compartment, Joanna had found the medical kit and was applying a regeneration patch to her arm. She joined them in the cockpit, her color already improving as the compound took effect. "So," she said, looking between Voss and Rello, "you've both just committed what I assume is high treason against your precious council. What's your plan now?" It was a question Voss had been too busy to fully consider until this moment. She had acted on instinct, on a sudden, overwhelming certainty that the council was wrong about humans, wrong about their research methods, wrong about so many things she had taken for granted throughout her career. "I don't know," she admitted, setting the vessel on an automated evasion course. "Everything I've worked for, everything I've believed, it's all been called into question today." "Welcome to the club," Joanna replied, but without the bitterness Voss might have expected. "Nothing makes you reevaluate your beliefs, quite like having them tested to destruction." Rello spoke up, his voice uncharacteristically firm. "There are others in the council who have questioned our methods. Researchers, assistants, even some junior counselors who believe our approach to other species is fundamentally flawed. They operate in secret, but they exist." "A resistance?" Joanna asked. "More like a philosophical minority," Rello clarified. "They believe true understanding comes from cooperation, not subjugation. They've established outposts on some of the outer moons where they conduct research, according to different ethical principles." Voss looked at her assistant with surprise. "You never mentioned this." "You never seemed open to hearing it," he replied simply. The vessel shuddered slightly as they hit turbulence in Varelli's 12's upper atmosphere. Through the viewports, they could see the Citadel receding behind them, its crystal spires now tiny glints against the planet's surface. "They'll send pursuit ships," Voss noted, checking the sensors. "But our head start and stealth systems should allow us to reach one of the outer moons before they can track us." "And then what?" Joanna asked. "I meant what I said before. I want to go home. Back to Earth." Voss considered this. "That may be complicated. The Council will have declared Earth a prohibited zone by now. All approach vectors will be monitored. So find an unmonitored one. It's not that simple. Even if we could reach Earth undetected, what then? The Council now considers humans a Class 13 threat at minimum. They'll be preparing contingencies for containment or elimination. Joanna's expression darkened. Based on one human who defended herself after being tortured? That's insane. That's the Council, Rello interjected. They categorize, they contain, they control. It's all they know. A thoughtful silence fell over the cockpit as the vessel broke free of the planet's atmosphere and entered the darkness of space. The stars spread out before them, countless points of light representing worlds the Council had categorized, studied, and often subjugated in the name of knowledge. What if, Voss said slowly, an idea taking shape. We could change that? What if we could show the Council, and all the worlds under their influence, that there's another way to approach interspecies relations? How? Joanna asked skeptically. With evidence. With the truth about what happened in that laboratory. Voss gestured to the data crystal she had salvaged. I have all the research data, every scan, every test, every recording. It shows not just your remarkable biology, but the fundamental flaws in the Council's methodology. You want to expose them, Rello realized, his eyes widening. I want to force them to reconsider their entire approach, Voss corrected. And I believe your friends on the outer moons might be interested in helping. Joanna didn't look convinced. That still doesn't get me home. No, Voss acknowledged. But it might prevent the Council from targeting Earth for containment. If we can demonstrate that their assessment of humans is based on fundamentally flawed research that violated their own ethical guidelines, we might be able to force a reassessment. And in the meantime, what? I just stay with you as your guest instead of your prisoner? No thanks. Voss understood the human skepticism. After what Joanna had endured, trust would not come easily. Perhaps not at all. I propose a compromise, she offered. Help us reach the research outpost on Lunar 7. Let me present our evidence to the dissenting faction Rello described. If they agree to support our cause, we'll find a way to get you home, even if I have to take you myself in this vessel. And if they don't agree, then you take this vessel and go. I'll show you how to operate it, how to avoid Council patrols, how to set a course for Earth. Rello looked alarmed at this proposition, but Voss silenced him with a gesture. This was her responsibility, her mistake to correct. Joanna studied her for a long moment, perhaps searching for deception. Finally, she nodded. All right, Lunar 7 first, then home. But I want your word, your personal guarantee, that you won't try to stop me if I decide to leave. You have it, Voss promised. And for what it's worth, I am truly sorry for what was done to you. There is no justification, no scientific rationale that can excuse it. No, Joanna agreed. There isn't. But at least you figured that out eventually. She paused, then added, On Earth, we have a saying, better late than never. Voss didn't entirely understand the idiom, but she grasped its meaning. Set course for Lunar 7, she instructed Rello, and activate all stealth protocols. The Council will be searching for us by now. As the vessel adjusted its trajectory and accelerated toward the distant moon, Voss found herself in entirely uncharted territory, not just in terms of her physical location, but in every aspect of her life. Everything she had believed about the proper order of the universe, about the Council's wisdom, about her own role as a scientist, all of it had been upended in the space of a few hours. And yet, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the genuine thrill of discovery. Not the clinical satisfaction of confirming a hypothesis, but the profound wonder of encountering something that challenged everything she thought she knew. Perhaps that, she reflected, as the stars streamed past the viewports, was what real science was meant to feel like all along. The journey to Lunar 7 took 3 standard days. During that time, an uneasy truce developed between the 3 fugitives. Joanna's condition improved rapidly as her remarkable biology purged the last traces of the mantis wasp venom from her system. Voss, true to her word, taught the human how to operate the vessel's key systems, while Rello shared what he knew about the research outpost they were approaching. "It was established 20 cycles ago," he explained, as they gathered in the small common area. "Originally as a legitimate council research station, but over time it became a haven for scientists who questioned orthodox methodologies." "How do you know all this?" Voss asked, still surprised by her assistant's hidden knowledge. Rello's skin flushed slightly. "My progenitor was one of the founders. She raised me with alternative perspectives on interspecies relations." "And you never mentioned this during your entire tenure as my assistant." "Would you have listened?" he countered gently. Voss had no answer to that. Before the events in the laboratory, she would indeed have dismissed such perspectives as irrelevant sentimentality, possibly even reported Rello for ideological deviation. "How are we going to approach them?" Joanna asked, bringing the conversation back to practical matters. "Won't they be suspicious of a council vessel suddenly appearing?" "They maintain a secure communication frequency," Rello replied. "I know the protocols. My progenitor made sure of that. We can contact them before we enter orbital range." "And what exactly are we going to tell them?" Joanna pressed. "That you kidnapped and tortured a human, then had a convenient moral awakening when it turned out we could fight back." Voss winced at the blunt assessment, but didn't deny it. "We tell them the truth, all of it, and we offer them something invaluable in return for their help." "The research data," Rello guessed. "Not just the data." Voss activated a display panel, bringing up images from the laboratory, specifically the microscopic recordings of Joanna's blood adapting to neutralize the venom. "This represents an evolutionary breakthrough, unlike anything in Council records. Adaptability at this level, this speed. It could revolutionize medical science across 1,000 worlds." "My blood is not yours to offer," Joanna objected sharply. "No, it isn't," Voss agreed. "And that's precisely the point. We're not offering them your blood. We're offering them the opportunity to establish ethical contact with humanity, to form a relationship based on consent and mutual benefit, rather than exploitation." Joanna still looked skeptical, but slightly less hostile. "And you think they'll go for that?" "I think they'll recognize that the Council's current approach to Earth will lead only to conflict," Voss replied. "A conflict that, based on what we've witnessed of human biology, they might not win as easily as they believe." The vessel's proximity alert chimed, indicating they were approaching Lunar 7's detection range. "It's time," Rello said, moving to the communication console. "I'll establish contact." As he worked, Voss found herself studying Joanna with new eyes, not as a specimen to be analyzed, but as a representative of a species she had fundamentally misjudged. Despite everything the human had endured, she maintained a dignity and resilience that commanded respect. "What will you do when you return to Earth?" Voss asked, genuinely curious. Joanna considered the question. "First, warn my people about what's out here. Then," she shrugged, "go back to what I was doing before, healing people, saving lives. Even after everything you've experienced. Especially after everything I've experienced." Joanna met her gaze steadily. "Someone once told me that knowledge gained through cruelty is fundamentally flawed. I'd like to prove that knowledge gained through compassion can be more powerful." Before Voss could respond, Rello called from the console. "Contact established. They're wary, but willing to receive us. They've transmitted approach coordinates." "Set course," Voss instructed, moving to the pilot station. And let's hope they're as open-minded as you believe. Lunar 7 loomed before them. A small, desolate moon orbiting a gas giant on the outer edges of the Varelli system. Its surface was pocked with craters and devoid of atmosphere, but scattered across its dark landscape were the distinctive domes of a research outpost. Following the transmitted coordinates, Voss guided the vessel toward a landing bay concealed within a massive crater. As they descended, armored doors slid open to reveal a pressurized hangar large enough to accommodate several vessels of their size. "They're more established than I expected," Voss noted, as she completed the landing sequence. "They've had time to build," Rello replied, "and many supporters within the Council's scientific community, even if those supporters can't acknowledge them publicly." Once the vessel was secure, they gathered at the airlock. Voss had provided Joanna with environmental gear suitable for the outpost, though the human had refused to wear anything bearing Council insignia. "Remember," Voss cautioned as the airlock cycled, "they have no reason to trust us. Let me do the initial explaining." The outer door slid open to reveal a reception committee of 5 individuals representing various species, all researchers, judging by their attire, and all armed with defensive weapons currently held at ready, but not aimed. At the forefront stood a tall, willowy being with iridescent skin and compound eyes that reminded Voss of Rello's. The family resemblance was unmistakable. "Progenitor," Rello said, stepping forward. "It's good to see you again." "My child," the being replied, lowering her weapon slightly. "Your message was unexpected, as is your choice of companions." Her gaze moved from Rello to Voss, then settled with obvious surprise on Joanna. "A human? Here?" "My name is Joanna Miles." The human introduced herself before Voss could speak. "Until recently, I was an unwilling research subject for the Deathworld Council. These 2 helped me escape, though one of them was also responsible for my capture." Direct and unvarnished truth, perhaps the best approach after all, Voss reflected. Rello's progenitor studied them for a long moment, then gestured to her companions. "Secure their vessel and scan it for tracking devices. The rest of you, come with me. This conversation requires privacy." They were led through a series of corridors into what appeared to be a conference room. Unlike the stark, utilitarian design of council facilities, this space incorporated elements that Voss recognized as being from various homeworlds: plants, artwork, architectural details that spoke of a more inclusive approach to interspecies cooperation. Once they were seated, Rello's progenitor, who introduced herself as senior researcher Kala, fixed Voss with an unwavering stare. "Dr. Aaron Voss, your reputation precedes you, the Council's foremost xenobiologist, dedicated to establishing the supremacy of Deathworld evolution." Her tone made the description sound less than complimentary. "What could possibly have happened to bring you to our door with a human companion and tales of escape?" "Reality happened," Voss replied simply. "Reality contradicted theory, and I chose to follow evidence rather than dogma." Over the next hour, they recounted everything: the Council's interest in human surgical abilities, Joanna's abduction, the escalating experiments, and the extraordinary biological response that had ultimately led to their flight from the Citadel. Throughout the narrative, Kala and her colleagues asked sharp, probing questions, particularly about the properties of Joanna's blood and the neural patterns Voss had observed. They seemed less interested in the political implications than in the scientific validity of what they were hearing. "May I?" Kala finally asked, gesturing to the data crystal Voss had placed on the table between them. Voss nodded, and Kala inserted the crystal into a reader. Holographic displays sprang to life around the table, images from the laboratory, microscopic recordings of Joanna's blood adapting to the venom, neural scans showing the organized wave patterns. The researchers studied the data in silence, occasionally exchanging glances or murmuring to each other in specialized technical languages not included in the translation system. This is unprecedented, Kala said at last. If verified, it represents an evolutionary paradigm that contradicts centuries of council doctrine. It's verified, Voss assured her. I conducted the test myself. The human adaptive response operates at a level beyond anything in our classification system. Which raises the question, one of the other researchers interjected, of why you've brought this to us, rather than presenting it to the council with appropriate reverence for their wisdom. The sarcasm in the last phrase was unmistakable. Because the council's response would be to classify humans as a threat and implement containment or elimination protocols. Voss replied. And because I've come to believe their entire approach to interspecies research is fundamentally flawed. This statement caused a ripple of reaction among the researchers. Surprise, certainly, but also what might have been cautious hope. And what do you propose instead? Kala asked. Voss glanced at Joanna, then back to the senior researcher. A new model, one based on consent, cooperation, and mutual benefit, beginning with helping Joanna return to Earth, not as a specimen escaping captivity, but as an ambassador, opening diplomatic relations. You're suggesting we openly defy the council? Another researcher asked, mandibles clicking with agitation. They would destroy this outpost without hesitation. Not if we present them with a fait accompli they cannot ignore, Voss countered. Not if we demonstrate that ethical cooperation yields better scientific results than forced experimentation. And how exactly would we demonstrate that? It was Joanna who answered. With me. With my willing participation in properly designed, ethically conducted research that I consent to. She looked around the table. You want to understand human adaptive biology? Fine. I'll show you, on my terms. And in return, you help protect Earth from your council's containment plans. Silence fell over the conference room as the researchers absorbed this proposal. It was radical, dangerous, and potentially revolutionary, not just for their understanding of human biology, but for the entire foundation of council doctrine regarding interspecies relations. This would mean opposing the combined might of the Deathworld Council, Kala said slowly. Even with the evidence you've presented, we would be vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Not necessarily, Voss replied. Remember, I was the council's chief xenobiologist. I know which counselors might be sympathetic to a new approach. I know which research divisions have questioned orthodox methodologies. And most importantly, I know exactly how to present this evidence in a way the council cannot simply dismiss. She's right, Rello added. And we're not alone. There are others within the council structure who would support us, if given the opportunity. Kala exchanged looks with her colleagues, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, she turned back to the three fugitives. We will need time to fully analyze this data and consider your proposal. In the meantime, you will remain as our guests. She emphasized the last word, clearly distinguishing their status from that of prisoners. Quarters will be prepared for you, and you will have access to most common areas of the outpost. And my ship? Joanna asked pointedly. The one Dr. Voss promised I could take if your answer was no? Kala's compound eyes fixed on the human, with what might have been respect. It remains in the hangar, untouched beyond security scans. I give you my word on that. As the meeting concluded, and they were escorted to their assigned quarters, Voss found herself in the unfamiliar position of having her fate decided by others. Throughout her career, she had been the one making judgments, classifying species, determining research priorities. Now she waited, along with Joanna and Rello, for Kala and her colleagues to reach their decision. Their quarters were simple, but comfortable, with environmental settings adjusted to accommodate their different physiological needs. Voss spent much of the waiting period reviewing her own research data, looking for additional insights that might strengthen their case. On the third day, they were summoned back to the conference room, Kala and her colleagues had been joined by several new faces, researchers from other parts of the outpost who had apparently been consulted on the decision. "We have reached a consensus," Kala announced without preamble. "We will support your proposal, with conditions." "What conditions?" Joanna asked immediately. "First, all research involving you or any other human will adhere to a strict ethical framework that you help design and must explicitly approve. Second, any findings will be shared openly among all participating parties. No proprietary claims, no restricted access. And third, before any contact with Earth is attempted, we will establish a comprehensive diplomatic protocol to ensure no misunderstandings can lead to conflict." Voss nodded. The conditions were reasonable, more than reasonable. In fact, they represented exactly the kind of approach she had come to believe was necessary. "And the Council?" she asked. "How do you propose we handle their inevitable opposition?" "By presenting them with a unified front, they cannot simply dismiss," Kala replied. "We have contacts throughout the scientific community, researchers who have long questioned Council methodologies, but lack the evidence or courage to speak openly. Your data, combined with Joanna's willing testimony, provides both." "You're talking about a fundamental challenge to Council authority," one of the new researchers noted. "A revolution, essentially." "A correction," Kala countered. "A necessary evolution in our approach to other species. One that the evidence demands." Joanna leaned forward. "And my return to Earth? When does that happen?" "Soon," Kala promised. "But not alone. We propose sending a small delegation, including Dr. Voss and my child Rello, to establish initial diplomatic contact, to explain what has happened, and to propose a formal relationship between Earth and the independent scientific community we represent." "The Council will try to prevent this," Voss warned. "Yes, they will. Which is why we must move quickly, before they can mobilize their full resources against us." Kala activated a display showing the Varelli system. "We have already begun preparations. A vessel is being outfitted with enhanced stealth technology and jump capabilities that should allow you to reach Earth before the Council can intercept you." The scale and speed of their response took Voss by surprise. "You've been planning this for some time, haven't you? Not just since we arrived." Kala's skin rippled in what might have been the equivalent of a smile. "Let's say we have long anticipated the need for a more direct challenge to Council doctrine. Your arrival with Joanna and the evidence you provided has simply accelerated our timeline." Over the next week, preparations for the Earth mission continued at a feverish pace. Voss worked closely with the outpost's researchers, sharing everything she knew about Council security protocols and potential vulnerabilities. Joanna participated in a series of carefully designed, fully consensual research sessions that yielded even more remarkable insights into human adaptive biology. And all the while, Rello served as a bridge between them, his unique perspective helping to translate concepts and concerns across the species divide. The diplomatic protocols took shape gradually, informed by Joanna's input about how humans might react to first contact. Unlike the Council's approach of categorization and control, these protocols emphasized mutual respect, information sharing, and collaborative decision-making. "There will be fear," Joanna warned during one planning session. "Humans have imagined contact with alien species for centuries, and not all those imaginings are peaceful." "Then we must be transparent," Voss replied. "About who we are, about what has happened, about the Council's existence and potential threat." "And about you?" Joanna asked pointedly. "About what you did to me?" Voss didn't flinch from the question. "Yes, about all of it. Full disclosure is the only path to genuine trust." As the launch date approached, tension throughout the outpost increased. Their long-range sensors had detected increased Council activity in the system, patrol vessels sweeping methodically through the outer regions, clearly searching for the fugitives. "They'll find us eventually," Kala acknowledged during their final briefing. We can't remain hidden forever, which makes your mission all the more critical. If you can establish contact with Earth, create a diplomatic channel that bypasses Council control, it gives us leverage we desperately need. The delegation had been kept deliberately small, just Voss, Rello, Joanna, and two of Kala's most experienced researchers. The vessel they would travel in was unlike any Council design Voss had ever seen. Sleeker, more organic in its construction, with technology that seemed to blend approaches from multiple species. "One last thing," Kala said as they prepared to board. She handed Voss a data crystal, unlike the standard Council version. "This contains everything we've learned about human biology from our sessions with Joanna, along with our complete research archives. If anything happens to this outpost, this knowledge must survive." The gravity of the responsibility settled on Voss like a physical weight. "I'll ensure it reaches the right hands." Joanna stepped forward then. Extending her hand to Kala in what Voss had learned was a human gesture of agreement or farewell. "Thank you for treating me like a person, not a specimen." Kala mimicked the gesture, her slender fingers wrapping around Joanna's. "Thank you for showing us what true resilience looks like, not just biological, but moral." As they boarded the vessel and prepared for departure, Voss found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From chief xenobiologist of the Deathworld Council to fugitive, from unquestioning adherent of Council doctrine to revolutionary, all because she had been willing to follow evidence where it led, even when it contradicted everything she thought she knew. The vessel rose silently from the outpost's concealed hangar, its advanced stealth systems rendering it invisible to standard Council detection methods. As they accelerated away from Lunar 7, setting course for the long journey to Earth, Voss joined Joanna at the viewport. Below them, the outpost was already receding, its domes barely visible against the moon's dark surface. Soon, it would be just another point of light in an infinite cosmos. A small outpost of independent thought in a galaxy dominated by Council dogma. "Do you think we'll succeed?" Joanna asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. "I don't know," Voss admitted. "The Council is powerful, and dogma is resilient. But if there's one thing I've learned from you, it's that adaptation is the true strength of any species." "And you've adapted pretty dramatically." "Yes, thanks to you." Voss turned to face the human directly. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know that meeting you, even under those terrible circumstances, changed everything for me. You forced me to see beyond my training, beyond the Council's doctrines, to a more complex and wonder-filled universe." Joanna was silent for a long moment. Then, to Voss's surprise, she smiled, a genuine expression devoid of the bitterness or anger that had characterized most of their interactions. "In human medicine," she said, "we have a concept called healing by secondary intention. It's when a wound is too large to simply stitch closed, so it has to heal from the inside out, slowly building new tissue. It takes longer and leaves a bigger scar, but sometimes it's the only way forward." "Is that what we're doing now?" Voss asked. "Healing by secondary intention?" "I think so. Not just for us, but for all the species caught in the Council's classification system." Joanna gazed out at the stars again. "It won't be quick, and it won't be painless. But maybe it's the only way forward." As the vessel accelerated to jump speed, preparing for the long journey to Earth, Voss found herself filled with an emotion she had rarely experienced in her scientific career. Hope. Not the cold satisfaction of confirming a hypothesis, or the clinical interest of observing a new phenomenon, but genuine hope for a better future, one built on understanding rather than domination, cooperation rather than classification. The stars stretched and blurred as the jump drive engaged, catapulting them toward Earth and whatever awaited them there, toward a new chapter in interspecies relations that would begin, fittingly, with the species that had upended every certainty the Deathworld Council had ever proclaimed. In the archives of the outpost on Lunar 7, a single entry was added to the file on Homo sapiens. Warning: biological apex predator. Approach with respect. And on a distant planet called Earth, humanity was about to discover they were not alone in the universe, and that their greatest strength lay not in the remarkable adaptability of their bodies, but in their capacity to choose a better path forward than the one that had been chosen for them. Months later, the grand halls of the Deathworld Council Citadel stood silent and largely empty. The crystal spires that had once symbolized the Council's power now housed only a skeleton staff, most of the counselors having retreated to their respective homeworlds in the wake of the unprecedented crisis. In what had once been Dr. Voss's laboratory, a new research team worked carefully under the supervision of both Council observers and human representatives. The containment modules had been removed, replaced by collaborative workstations where researchers of various species shared findings and methodologies. And in a quiet corner of the facility, a simple plaque had been installed, its message clear even to species who could not read the human language in which it was written. To those who value life above knowledge, the revolution had begun not with weapons or warfare, but with a simple recognition that true understanding could only be achieved through respect, consent, and cooperation. It was a lesson the Deathworld Council had learned at great cost, a lesson taught by a species they had once dismissed as merely Class 12, but who had proven to be something far more remarkable. Not just apex predators, but teachers.